In this episode, we talk about what a parliamentary committee said regarding the centrally protected monuments and the functions of the Archeological Survey of India. We also talk about why the Gujarat government is banning the Conocarpus trees in the state. But first, we talk about the Armed Forces Special Powers Act in Manipur. Hi, I'm Rahel Philipose and you are listening to Three Things, the Indian Express News Show. On Wednesday, the Home Department of the Manipur government announced that the disturbed area status in Manipur under the Armed Forces Special Powers Act will remain unchanged except for in specific regions. And the status quo will be maintained for the next 6 months starting from 1st of October. AFSPA, which was implemented in the northeastern state in 1980, is an act that gives armed forces sweeping powers to carry out operations in areas deemed disturbed due to insurgencies. Because of these powers and their utilization, the act has frequently faced criticism, particularly for alleged extrajudicial killings. Sometime back, when we had spoken to the Indian Express's Isha Roy, she had told us more about it.
There are massive human rights concerns with a law such as the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which actually gives blanket power to security forces to carry out operations in many states in the Northeast. And one of the biggest criticisms against the Act and allegations of human rights violations comes from the fact that when the Indian Army or the Assam Rifles or paramilitary forces carry out such operations as anti-terror operations, they can actually pick up individuals on suspicion. And these individuals who security forces allege either have terrorist links or are terrorists themselves, they very rarely face trial. They don't usually get justice. It's never usually proven that they actually do have these links.
Now, in 2004, the AFSPA was withdrawn from certain parts of Imphal, the capital city, following protests that erupted when the bullet-ridden and mutilated body of a 32-year-old woman named Tangja Manorama was discovered near her home. People in Manipur alleged that she was raped and killed by the Assam Rifles. Following this discovery, massive protests swept through Manipur. And a few days after Manorama's death, a group of middle-aged women walked naked through the streets of Imphal and gathered around the headquarters of the Assam Rifles holding banners that read, "Indian Army rape us, kill us." And it's worth noting that while Manorama's case brought the issue of AFSPA-related human rights violations to the forefront, Isha says that the act has been widely misused in the state ever since it was implemented.
An armed personnel can only shoot in self-defense if they feel threatened. But what has been seen and documented, especially in Manipur, because in Nagaland there hasn't been that kind of documentation, but especially in Manipur, is that more often than not, AFSPA was rampantly misused, not just by the Indian security forces, but also by the local police, sometimes to even settle personal scores, and even by informants of the security forces. For instance, if there was a property dispute between two families, an informant would accuse one particular family of having terror links, and the security forces would go and detain members of that family or even carry out extrajudicial killings. In Manipur, there's an organization called IFAM, which is an organization of the families of the victims of AFSPA, which approached the Supreme Court in 2012, and they have alleged that there have been 1,528 extrajudicial killings in the state between the 1970s and 2012. And the Supreme Court is looking into the matter right now. The court set up a committee under Santosh Hegde, which is called the Santosh Hegde Committee, to look at randomly pick up 6 of these 1,528 alleged extrajudicial killings. In 2013, the Santosh Hegde Committee studied 6 cases. They carried out trials, interviewed police officers, as well as the families of the victims. And their findings were really landmark and startling. Firstly, they deemed that all 6 cases were fake encounters and not carried out by the security forces in self-defense, as the security forces had claimed. And they also found huge lacuna in the way these cases were investigated. For instance, a combined force of Assam Rifles and Manipuri commandos would carry out an extrajudicial killing, and the police officers involved in the killing will also lodge an FIR and be a complainant in the case that they themselves would investigate.
As we mentioned earlier, AFSPA was withdrawn from certain parts of Imphal in 2004. However, Isha pointed out that the impact of living in a disturbed area goes beyond just the loss of lives.
AFSPA, it's always been there. It's still implemented, although it's been lifted from certain areas in Nagaland and in Manipur. But before this was done, the people of these states have literally been living under the shadow of the gun for decades. And psychologically, this has a huge impact on residents. When I reached Imphal, for instance, in 2012, although insurgency was already showing signs of a decline, there weren't as many incidents that were taking place while I was there. Nevertheless, Imphal city was literally like a fortress. It was heavily militarized. There were bunkers in places, and more than just the security forces, it's even the Manipuri commandos, which is the Manipur's elite forces, which had a lot of power. So they would drive through the city on patrol through the day in these heavily armored, bulletproof vehicles, and even in gypsies, and when they would travel through certain areas, people would have to make way. People were afraid of security forces. They'd quickly make way for these vehicles. They would be afraid of being asked to get off the vehicle and searched. There were barricades across the city, even outside the city, where people were stopped at random, frisked. This was the case in Nagaland as well. So it made for a really vitiating, coercive, militarized atmosphere, which is not a normal way for any community in any part of the world to live. So it had huge psychological ramifications on the people. I remember when we used to travel to More, which is a border town on the Indo-Myanmar border. About an hour before you reach the town, there's a huge paramilitary barricade, and people traveling would have to wait in a queue in their vehicles, sometimes even for 1 or 2 hours, for their vehicles to be searched and for the people to be frisked as well. So this really created an atmosphere of alienation for the people of the Northeast, for them to feel that they were not really a part of the country. It was like being colonized, or like having the forces of another country come and occupy your land. So this entire feeling of being a part of the country, being integrated, was absent. So AFSPA really created a very alienating, coercive, and fearful atmosphere in the states.
Now, AFSPA once again came under scrutiny after the Oting killings in Nagaland in 2021, during which 13 people were killed by armed forces in a botched operation. And additionally, last year, Union Home Minister Amit Shah announced that they would repeal AFSPA from the entire Northeast region. In fact, in recent times, the Manipur government has gradually decreased the number of areas designated as disturbed. This year in April, they lifted the status from 19 police stations located in Manipur's Meitei-dominated valley. However, the ethnic conflict that erupted in Manipur on the 3rd of May between its two key communities, the Meiteis and the Kukis, resulted in the widespread loss of lives, property, and a complete breakdown of law and order. And that, according to the Manipur government, raised concerns about maintaining public safety and order, leading them to maintain the status quo. In fact, the crisis in Manipur escalated once again this week when two photographs surfaced. These photographs showed the dead bodies of two young students from the dominant Meitei community who had gone missing on the 6th of July. Nearly 3 months after their disappearance, the photos emerged, leading to widespread outrage in a state that has been witnessing continuous violence since May. After the photos surfaced, the state government announced that swift action would be taken against the perpetrators. Mobile internet services have also been snapped in the region for 5 days. And next, we talk about centrally protected monuments. Last week, the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Transport, Tourism and Culture presented a report to the Parliament regarding the protected monuments of India. The report, titled 359th Report on Functioning of Archeological Survey of India, looked at the Archeological Survey of India, or ASI's core functions, and also raised concerns about the status of conservation and the protection of monuments.
But the point to be noted here is, which is a major point in the days to come, that it will change the list of our centrally protected monuments.
That is the Indian Express's Divya A, and she tells us that right now, India has 3,691 centrally protected monuments across the country. And according to the report, many of these monuments are of minor significance.
The committee is of the view, it has in fact recommended, that many of these monuments do not gel with the ethos of the country and they are pretty minor in nature. So consequently, there is a need to relook at the list of centrally protected monuments in India. In fact, I would say this is the first ever time that something like this has been recommended and which will come into effect in the coming days, because as of now there has never been any such plan to kind of reconsider the list of monuments. There have been things about adding a monument or two every 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, but I think we haven't dropped any monument from the list ever in the last 75 years of independent India's history.
To know more about what the committee said about these minor monuments and the functioning of the ASI, my colleague Utsa Sarmin speaks to Divya in this segment.
So Divya, what was the reason behind the parliamentary committee's suggestion to drop certain structures from the list of protected monuments?
So we are using the word dropped, but the parliamentary panel has used the word rationalize and categorize of the said list of monuments for several reasons, which can be on the basis of their national significance, how important a monument is nationally, or whether it has a very local function or local heritage value, or if the architecture or the style of the monument is of significant importance, or if you wanted to add more important architectural and cultural wonders in the list, we have to drop some, and we have to drop those that are probably not important in the present scheme of things to the country, what it stands today, because ever since we got independent, we have never really looked at this list ever again. For instance, the committee says that there are a large number of monuments which have no national significance. In that context, it says that there are about 75 graves of British era soldiers or officials, which is of no notable importance now to India. So some other such specific examples have also been cited by the committee. For instance, they're saying there is a small brick wall enclosure containing 2 graves in Karnataka's Kumta, which is a protected monument under the supervision of the ASI. So, for instance, ASI has to fix budget and resources equally on something as minor as this, as maybe the Taj Mahal and the Red Fort. So, there is a little bit of checks and balances have to be done and things have to be categorized. So, that is basically the whole idea.
Right, and usually around these protected monuments, you also have certain restrictions which can be inconvenient for residents in the neighborhood. And we understand that the committee also raised some issues about this, right?
So in case of all the 3,691 monuments, there is a general rule which says that an area of 100 meters radius around the monument is like a regulated zone. So you cannot have any sort of construction there. And another area of like a 300-meter radius is again a buffer zone, where also you have to take permissions from the government, from the National Monument Authority, in case you want to do any construction or any changes, in case your house is already there and falls in that area. There is also a view in the government that this is also creating a lot of problems in terms of infrastructure projects. For instance, we were given the example of a small statue in the middle of a chowk in Agra. So when they had to clear the map for the Agra metro, they had to leave that area out because it was a protected monument and no construction activity could be carried out in a 300-meter radius. So these are the kind of practical on-ground issues that people are facing, that the authorities may be facing, that common people may be facing. So generally, because of these things, the monument, becomes a bone of contention between the local people and the Archaeological Survey of India. And as it is, practically speaking, all monuments will not require such kind of strict regulations because maybe the structure is not so fragile, maybe it is a very small thing that we are protecting. So that is where this thing about categorization comes into play.
Right, and Divya, when we spoke last year, there were some issues concerning missing monuments. Around 50 protected monuments basically could not be located by the ASI, even though they existed on paper. So, did the report say what will happen to these missing monuments or whether the ASI should continue searching for them?
So missing monuments was another point of contention that the ASI was largely, rebuffed about because the CAG had flagged these 92 missing monuments many, many years ago. And in the last few years, all ASI could do was it was able to find about 40 of them. But for the other 50, it said that they are not found and they are either lost to urbanization. That means somebody has raised them to build their house, or they have submerged under dams or reservoirs or something. Or, they are just lost and not traceable. So now the parliamentary committee has said that an urgent physical survey of these monuments, of in fact of all monuments, be carried out, and a final list be prepared of what is available, what is to be found, and if something is damaged or not to be found, what is the status. So, like a final status report on the monuments of India. Unfortunately, this is also something which has not been done ever since independence.
Okay, and Divya, the report also raised issues about the ASI's core mandate and suggested that it needs to be fixed. So, can you tell us what their core mandate is and what part of it requires fixing?
See, ASI's core mandate remains protection of heritage, preservation, conservation, restoration work. But a lot of it is also now spilling into administrative work, ticketing, collections, construction of facilities like visitor facilities around monuments. So the parliamentary committee is of the view, they have recommended that, these two functions be clearly divided. So in fact, they have gone as far as to suggest that ASI should be divided into two organizations, while the core mandate, which is the protection of the monuments and the conservation, restoration work and all of that, which is a more technical work and more specialized work in nature, that should be taken care of by archaeologists and historians and everything who makes up ASI. And the ticketing and the administrative and the managerial work can be given to another, body which is called the Heritage Development Organization, and they can take care of the ticketing part and other functions which don't need the core competence of the archaeologists to come into play.
Right, and we also understand that a lot of private players have come in lately to develop visitors' facilities in and around these protected monuments, and the committee expressed concerns regarding that as well. So tell us about the kind of issues they had raised about this.
So we are talking of the Adopt a Heritage scheme that the government had come out with, wherein private players, they could spend money to develop visitor facilities, in lieu of which they would be called monument mitras, and their hoardings will be put up on the site. So it was more like a CSR activity fraud for these private players. But the parliamentary panel has also, lashed out at this kind of scheme because they are saying that the monument mitra, or the company, the private player which adopts a particular monument to develop visitor facilities, they should have some kind of knowledge of how to work in a monument. After all, it's a heritage site. So even if you're developing visitor facilities, it has to kind of gel with the context It should not look very out of place. You should not conduct some high level construction in an area where the monument is fragile. Of course, ASI supervises all of that, but things have happened. So that is also one point that the parliamentary committee has raised, that if you're getting in private layers, please monitor them, please supervise them, and please make sure there are checks and balances. The idea is that this scheme should not be counterproductive.
And could you talk about how the ASI has responded to these suggestions, or whether there are any concerns that they have raised regarding conserving and protecting the monuments?
See, ASI, in terms of its functioning and in terms of why they could not take care of some monuments, because that was also a point raised by the committee, that some monuments have remained neglected, the security situation is bad, there have been encroachments. So in those contexts, ASI has cited fund crunch, they have cited lack of staff, they have cited a lack of experts, they have cited that they have a lot of vacancies, but they have not been filled because experts haven't come in. So those kind of things that they have cited. But in terms of conservation and restoration, they have also cited the work that they have done across the country on major monuments. They've cited these two sites that have just been included on the World Heritage List, the Santiniketan and the Hoysala temples in Karnataka. And they have also given examples of a lot of their work abroad, which was done in conjunction with the Ministry of External Affairs, and how conservation work abroad has garnered a lot of praise in the international community. But yeah, when it comes to these minor monuments and this rationalizing of monuments, ASI hasn't said much, but Ministry of Culture, which governs the ASI, there is already talk in the government that, in view of this larger decolonization and, Bharatiyata kind of narrative which is going on, there is already a view that, things that don't gel with the Indian ethos, especially heritage, have to, let go of. So this kind of gels with the government's view, and so in the days to come, we will see that happening on ground. How much time it takes is for us to see, but this is something which is going to happen in the days to come.
And finally, we talk about an invasive tree species in Gujarat. Over the last few years, rows of Conocarpus trees, which are an exotic mangrove species, have become a pretty common sight in cities across Gujarat. Now, for the uninitiated, this is an evergreen plant native to the Americas that is known to grow pretty fast. According to the Indian Express's Gopal Kateshiya, who reports from Gujarat for the paper, these trees are often used to beautify urban spaces.
This has become a very popular plant in landscape gardens and cityscapes. So we find it in Vadodara and in Ahmedabad. We find it along the roads or in the median of the roads. And in fact, there is a garden called Ramvan in Rajkot, where this species is the most abundant species. It has been planted across the state in major cities like Surat, Vadodara, Ahmedabad, Rajkot. We also see a lot of plantations of Conocarpus in big factories in Kutch, in Morbi, those ceramic industry.
But the state government has now decided to ban these Conocarpus trees. In a circular issued earlier this week, the principal chief conservator of forests and head of Forest Force, S.K. Chaturvedi, emphasized the need to control the growth of exotic species Conocarpus. In fact, Gujarat isn't the first state to ban these trees. Earlier, Telangana too had banned this plant species because of its alleged impact on the environment as well as on human health. Gopal joins us in this segment to explain why the government has taken this step. So, Gopal, why exactly is this particular plant species being banned in the first place?
Yeah, so this is a comparatively new species to come to India. And as it happens with any other species, there are a lot of concerns and there is no consensus about its benefits or loss versus benefit equation. So concerns say that because it's very fast growing, so it sucks in a lot of soil moisture. And the Forest Department circular, which was issued by the Office of the Head of the Force, also mentions that root system of this plant are damaging communication cables, drainages, and water distribution pipelines. And it also said that this is also a public health hazard in the sense that pollen emanating from these trees, released by these trees, is leading to allergy, asthma, people catching cold, etc. So this is not good at all. So these are the reasons Forest Department has cited. But environmentalists say that there has to be sufficient research about this species before taking any drastic decision about its benefits or so-called disadvantages.
Right. And Gopal, what does the law say about banning a species like this?
Yeah, so we have a National Biodiversity Authority. In fact, that is a National Biodiversity Act, and Gujarat has a Biodiversity Board as well. So these are the bodies which govern the laws. But the main problem is that environmental laws are being implemented by some agency which is not the Forest Department. For example, in Gujarat, it's Gujarat Pollution Control Board, which has the jurisdiction to implement laws in this regard. So if one wants to import biological material from outside, there are rules governing that. But we are told that this is an alien invasive species and not just exotic species. Exotic species are imported with some intended benefits. But alien invasive species are ones, in simple terms, which have made their way to the country through unofficial channels, and they are growing rapidly, and they are a problem for local ecology rather than giving benefits to local ecology or people who support depend on such ecologies. So it remains to be seen how the government or the law enforcement agencies view this problem.
Okay, so Gopal, how exactly does the government plan to clamp down on these trees being planted in the state?
So the circular scope is presently limited to the plant nurseries of the Gujarat Forest Department. There is a division called Social Forestry Department within the Forest Department of Gujarat, which has its plant nurseries, which nurses plants and then distributes among the public as well as plantation by the department itself. So the circular expressly says that no nursery run by the Forest Department shall prepare plants of this species, nor will plants of this species be planted anywhere, and that the public awareness should be created about hazards of this plant. So presently, the scope of the ban is limited, but I've been told that the Forest Department has forwarded a proposal to the Gujarat government that there should be a blanket ban. Now, it remains to be seen whether the government accepts this proposal or not. So that being so, that means that private nurseries can continue with preparing plants of this species and selling and distributing it. And it also means that urban local bodies like municipal corporations or municipalities, they can continue planting Conocarpus in the median of the roads or on the borders of the gardens, etc. And same way, private citizens are also free. So are the industrialists. So this is just a beginning, but it does send a message about the species that, okay, these are the concerns about this species. So you be cautious while planting it.
Right. And you spoke to several forest officials and experts. What were the varying perspectives on this particular matter?
So broadly, we can see this issue from two perspectives. One is the environmental ecologist perspective and the other the convenience of plantation. So this species is very easy to grow. You don't require much maintenance. Once you have planted a sapling, that's it. It keeps growing with very less amount of water or irrigation required. And leaves of this plant are not palatable to any species. So this is the convenient part of it, that because it's very easy to cultivate or to plant and raise. So people are going for it. So they say that enough research is required to take a decision. And they are citing examples of eucalyptus as well as Prosopis juliflora, which is called Gando bowel. They were introduced to India and I think a few decades ago, and there were similar concerns that destroy the local ecology. But now eucalyptus is a popular agroforestry plant, and it is a source of timber as well as pulp for paper industry. So they say that we could have waited for substantial amount of research to come and then take a call. But the environmentalists and ecologists say that, let's not delay a decision and then take corrective measures when the problem turns into a situation where we need to spend a lot of resources. So I was talking to Professor Padamnabi Nagar of Botany Department of MS University of Baroda. He said that this is a welcome move. And his logic was that we have enough number of native species which are as easy to grow as Conocarpus, but they have a functional role to play in ecology. So he was giving examples of this butterfly bush, then this nagod, indrajo, etc. So he said that these can grow in almost all climatic conditions with very least maintenance. So they said, why shouldn't we promote these native species instead of going for Conocarpus? So it's still very debatable issue.
You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. It was written and produced by me, Rahel Philipose, Utsa, Sarmin and Shashank Bhargava. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone who you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.